a big thank you to everybody who is involved, everyone from the Swiss Consulate to ISM, Scott, for introducing us to the opportunity to be here, to Foresight, the wonderful session done by Nina this morning and getting to know her recently, and being part of the Innovation Fest, of course. So thank you very much to everybody involved. A little bit about Volition. I know Bhupinder knows us probably from a while ago. It's been, I think, a couple or few years, but good to see some familiar faces again and meet some new ones. So for those of you who do not know Volition, what we do is we provide programming and educational content as well as one-on-one or one-to-many coaching services for entrepreneurs and startups all around the world. We do that through funded or partner programming. We do that through specialized and tailored events, as well as the coaching services. And as Thomas brilliantly mentioned, we've done that with a lot of companies all around the world. So it's an honor to help entrepreneurs and startups thrive. A little bit about me. So I am a over 20-year veteran of entrepreneurship with a couple of exits under my belt, as well as several failures that are part of the journey towards success. And along the way, I have had the opportunity to raise a few $1,000,000 in my career, as well as I guess what gives me a unique perspective of being on all sides of the table. So being the entrepreneur who's raised, being the person who has funded, being the person getting the grants, being the person on the other side of the table, listening to the pitches, gauging, judging, paneling, all that kind of stuff. So with all of the experience that I've gained over the years, that's allowed me to have a position of being able to love, along with my love for teaching and passing along knowledge, the ability to teach others on how to professionally pitch and present. So a little bit about what we're going to see today. So today, what we're going to go through is kind of three components mainly. Is we're going to talk a bit about the mindset that we're going to have or should have going into our pitching and presenting. We're going to talk a bit how to use story and then how to use structure combined to have the best pitch possible for our audience going forward. So I'm going to get started with the investor's mindset. So something that I kind of discovered a long time ago is that really trying to get into the mindset of what the investor is looking for. What do they want? What do they desire? What do they anticipate to hear? And ultimately, what's sort of the red flags, if you will, and the green flags, for example. So thinking about all of those things. So on the screen here, we've got some examples of maybe some of the things that, investors might think of, at least maybe from a negative perspective. And this isn't to bring negativity to the presentation, but it's more just to get you maybe thinking about some of the things they might be looking for and looking to answer, because at the end of the day, as I'm sure many of you probably understand, investing is risky and there's a lot of risk to it. And the reality is in clean tech and impact tech, usually, not always, but usually it's a bit of a longer play. The average exit strategy, usually for most clean tech companies on average by the statistics, is usually between 5 and 10 years. So, as opposed to like high tech AI, blah, 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 you're in those, you're looking at like 3 to 7, somewhere in there, depending on what you're looking at. So, knowing that, we really need to understand the investor's mindset, what they're looking for. So, some of the key things I really want to point out is definitely in this case, one of the major things they're going to be looking for is ultimately how you're tracking your impact stats, your metrics, how are you actually indicating that you're making a difference, and that you're actually measuring that impact. One of the toughest things can be, how do you actually measure that? And this is going to be one of the strongest questions that most investors are going to ask and look for, because they need to know that along the way, it's not just about the impact in terms of the economic impact. Of course, that's super important too. But overall, is your business, is your product, is your solution going to actually solve things at a big enough level that it's going to draw enough attention, that it's going to draw down the effect that you're looking for? Because that's ultimately also what's going to lead you probably to an eventual exit as well. And at the end of the day, if I'm an investor, I want to know that there's an eventual exit strategy involved in this, and how we communicate with that with people in the future. So some of the things also, another thing I want to point out here is something that's very strong on my mind recently, as I've been teaching intellectual property workshops recently as well, is really thinking about the intellectual property. What's the barrier to entry on this? Now, coincidentally, most, if not all of you in the clean tech sector, the companies and the products that you're building, very likely a ton of IP, whether it's anything from patents to the trademarks, the copyright, the trade secrets that you might hold, some of the things that you have. It's going to be really, really important for you to understand your IP strategy, what IP you have, what IP you can have, because I can almost guarantee you that at the stages you're at, if you're going to fundraise, and let me just say for a second, in Canada, if you are going to approach organizations, and I think from what I've learned from Nina about the European side of things in terms of grants and things like that, very similar. And if you're going to be looking for something like that, if you're going to do business in Canada and there's opportunities for that, grant providers are going to ask the same questions. They're going to ask you, what about your IP, your intellectual property? How are you protected? What are you tracking? What do you have? What will you have? In Canada, there's a huge focus on this right now in terms of intellectual property. So you're really going to want to be able to speak to that as best as you can. And so some other things to really think about is, your scaling. What I really appreciated in the previous presentation from Nina was that she had a couple of examples where companies had signed, pilots, right? We even talked very briefly about Ballard signing a pilot or a new customer in Europe with a bus company, or there was the company that I think Nina mentioned that has signed a pilot project for, I think it was a mine in Australia, if I remember right. Yeah, and this is important because we're talking about traction, right? And a reminder that traction isn't just revenue. Traction is anything that's propelling your business or your vehicle forward, right? And so again, this is going to be something that investors are really going to be looking for is, hey, look, I understand that you are building this thing, you're still working on the prototype and you're still working on, solving the problem. But, even if you can start thinking about pipeline, what are your potential entries into market? Where might you have some pilots? Have you even talked to anybody yet? So it's going to depend on the stage you're at. So if you're very early stage, you really want to think about who are you talking to? What's your pipeline? If you've started the process, who do you have in that pipeline that you can talk about? How have the conversations gone so far? Are they excited about it? Where do they see using it? What does the solution look like for them? What's the value that is going to be created out of that? I'm really a big fan of the term value chains that Nina was using a lot in the previous presentation. I love that idea of value chains, right? How are you going to create value for the whole chain along the way? So in the positive side of things, some of the positive things that investors are going to think of, I hope, when you do your presentation and you're having your conversations, are things like, I'm convinced of the impact. I get it. I see where, you know, in some cases, I've heard some presentations. Bhupinder, I think, actually is probably a good example of this. I remember from his pitch a few years ago. Maybe it's modified or evolved since then. But I do remember him talking about the storage of energy and then how that can create an impact over time. And it was almost kind of like for lack of a better term, a calculation almost in a sense. It's almost like creating an algorithm or an engine. It's like if I do this, it equals this, and then over time, this is the overall impact, right? So if you're able to show something along those lines and get people really, able to chew on those numbers, even if they're not specifically clean tech investors, there are investors who aren't clean tech investors or impact investors that are still looking to get into this space. So if we can do something to help them understand, be able to chew on things, those numbers, again, that's going to make a big difference between them saying, I don't get it, I'm not sure where this is going, to I understand and I see where this is going to go, and I get the impact that it's going to make, and I need to be part of this. Notice the word, I need to be part of this. That's a beautiful thing when you can get an investor to that, or a grant provider to get to that point of, I need to be part of this. And of course, things talking about your team, that's going to be super important. And one thing that a lot of people forget, and I know for a fact here in Canada, many investors want to be a part of the process. Now, I don't want to scare you. I'm not talking about like they're going to be in your day-to-day operations and all that stuff and breathing down your neck constantly. But many investors, especially at the angel investment stage, they're going to want to have a level of involvement. And one of their levels of involvement, angels get into investing because they want to help. They want to be part of the process. They want to have the door open or help open doors when you need that help. And they want to know that you're not going to be afraid to ask for help, right? So coachability is a big part of the investment thesis, if you will, or an investability outlook. And, understanding how the money is going to impact the business overall. What is the money going to achieve, or the ask overall? I shouldn't say just funds, but maybe just the overall ask. What is that going to help you achieve? So these are really some things to kind of digest and think about when you are getting into the investment and the funding conversations and opportunities. So then we got to think about our pitch mindset. So how do we want to have a mindset, or what mindset should we have when we're pitching and presenting? So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, I know it depends on the stage kind of a little bit that you might be at. So, if you are kind of an earlier stage, you're going to be looking at more kind of customer discovery, pilot acquisition. You need funds to help you essentially survive while you're building the business case and the business thesis and the prototype and doing your customer discovery. And then eventually you're, with luck, some of you might already be at this point where you've talked to some pilots, you've had a pilot, or you've done a couple pilots, you've got some results. Now you want to start scaling that up. And I hope also maybe starting to look at protecting some of the IP that you've created or are creating. And now you're looking at bringing that further. Now, as you can see, there's kind of a process to this, right? So you're going to go from your founders and friends and family. I call it the FFF round. So friends, family, and founders. And then you're moving into angel investors, which we have a very extensive angel community all across Canada. Nina was talking about it before, so I'll just kind of connect into that. Nina was, she did kind of a zoom in or a zoom out and a zoom in into the different provinces and the cities and sort of the hubs within that. The hubs within that similarly are where a lot of the investments happen. Probably the most active investment places are Vancouver, Toronto for sure. Those are the 2 points on either side of the country. And then there's a lot happening in Calgary, Alberta right now, as well as in the Maritimes, which would be like Nova Scotia and the exact opposite coast of Vancouver, as well as there's some investments happening in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and some other small places as well. Following what Nina said previously, talking about the hubs, and talking about like in Alberta, there's a big concentration on Enertech, Cleantech, you know, the whole part about giving back to the planet as you take from it. That's where a lot of the investments are going into right now. And then there's also a lot of funding opportunities from grant providers in Alberta specifically. The government has put in a lot of money to support entrepreneurship and startup, especially in the clean tech sector. So it's a great place to look if you're looking for an entry into Canada. And also, coincidentally, new statistic I learned about a year ago is that Calgary is the highest per capita location of head offices of businesses in North America. Something I didn't know until recently. So it's basically Calgary and Austin in the US is another hub as well. Then you might be going at later stages, and this is where you're going to be starting to get into replicability, scalability, duplication, expansion, whether it's for horizontal or vertical expansions. And then that's where, you know, you're going to be talking to VCs. But the big thing with venture capital is they're looking at the numbers, right? Like, just to keep it simple, think if you've got revenue, you've got replicability, you've got kind of an engine, that's where the VCs are going to start getting interested. But they're going to want to see you generating something equivalent to revenue, at least in Canada. Generally, the starting point is when you're at around $500,000 to $800,000 in annual revenue. That's when the VCs are going to start to want to look at you. Doesn't mean they're necessarily ready to invest, but a lot of them are going to be open to the conversation at that point and at least start following your progress. A lot of them, just to be clear, a lot of them, their theses can't invest until you're kind of at the $1 million mark. Now, in the clean tech sector, there are some exceptions to that, but then you usually have to have a very strong IP portfolio and a lot of protection for your intellectual property for them to be able to looking at investing. I just want to go to Bhupinder's question here in the chat very quickly. Regarding the Alberta market, is there a focus on sustainability tech and clean tech for funding and pilot testing? I'm going to say Nina might have an insight on this as well, but I'm going to say from what I've seen in the last couple of years, yes. The answer to that very simply would be yes, from what I've seen. And I know particularly that there's a lot of funding coming out of Calgary and Edmonton for piloting and testing, but I think Nina wants to add in something.
Yes, for sure. I think I agree fully with you, and especially in like Calgary and Edmonton, you really see develop like those hubs. And then there's several organizations like Innovate Calgary, and I think they built like an innovation center. So I think in those two cities, there's for sure quite some opportunities. So totally agree with you.
Yeah, in Edmonton particularly, there's one called it used to be called the ERIN program. Now it's called Executives on Demand program, and they fund companies for up to 100 hours of support through professional advisors and coaches to help you build your company. So they'll fund it up to, it's basically like, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, I understand, but it's basically up to $10,000, just straightforward. There are some rules to that. You might have to have a location in Alberta, for instance, and in Edmonton area, but it's just an example of many of the funding initiatives and push for that type of innovation in Alberta. However, outside of the funding, aspect and fundraising and all of that. What I want to remind everybody is that it shouldn't be just about the money. Honestly, what I've found over the years in Canada, particularly, and not just in Canada, actually in the US and in when I've done some workshops and things like that in Africa and other places, it can't be just about the money. Especially the more early stages you are. If you're kind of at, early stage, just go back to this for a second. If you're kind of in this area here, then a lot of it, what I found over the years, a lot of it is about relationship building and the connections that you create over time. So a lot of it is going to be building that trust. Honestly, raising money from investors is a lot like relationship building. It is a relationship, and there's got to be a lot of trust between the individuals to know that, I feel like I trust that I know what you're going to try to do. You have a plan, you have a strategy, you're going to execute, you're going to ask for help when you need it. And you need to trust them that they're going to come through when you need help and that you can go to them for help and you can talk to them. It is like a relationship. It's, for lack of a better term, kind of like dating. And it is a bit of a sales process as well, right? It's, the reality, also remembering that you're not going to go into a pitch event, generally speaking, and people are just going to whip out their checkbook and start writing you checks or, shooting cash guns up in the air. That's not how it works. It's about getting to that next conversation, because that's really where the magic starts to happen, right? It's when I sit down in a room with Ruslan and he is expressing to me his passion about the business they're building and the incredible impact it's going to have, and that, and even starting to hear what the vision of the future looks like for Ruslan, that's where it really gets me bought into it, and I can see the vision for myself. That's where that happens in the conversation, right? You're not going to sell somebody necessarily just from the pitch. So what I always try to remember is that the pitch is to help you whet the appetite for further conversation and build those connections and have those conversations over time. And also, I mean, in addition to that, the pitching is also a great opportunity for you to build awareness. Many of us are probably very aware that building a business, in many cases, is like building a brand, or is building a brand, and having brand awareness ahead of walking into a room. And, when you walk into a room and I say, Swiss Vault, I've heard of you before, that's really powerful stuff, to have people know the brand even before they know that you're part of it when you walk into the room. And then a big one for Cleantech, for sure, is as I mentioned before, the communicating the impact. Yes, it's important to have your impact goals. It's important to have your impact metrics. But how do you communicate those things in a way that anyone can understand, right? I mean, here's the reality. What I've come to learn about in entrepreneurs and startups in this particular space, you do it because you're passionate about it. That's what I almost always find every single time, is Cleantech entrepreneurs are passionate about solving that problem. There was one I met recently. I was telling Nina about this in a recent call. There was this fellow I met recently where, they found a way to pull phosphor from runoffs from farms and be able to put that into some sort of pellets that then they put then into lakes to help clean the lakes. I just blows my mind. But the passion that this entrepreneur has, he's only at pilot stages right now, but I'm so inclined to believe in him and in the solution, simply just from the passion that he has for the solution, for helping Canada's freshwater, and help the country and planet overall, right? That's a big deal. And the ability for him to communicate that impact is going to be really, really important. And so that was one of the things that we discussed in the session with him. So, making sure you're clear about those goals and how are you going to track and measure those things. I get it. Some of you might be at a point where you're still kind of like, okay, we're still figuring it out. We're still piloting. We're still testing. We don't really know for sure. Investors understand that. So don't stress, don't worry. But I think the big thing that I would stress to you here is just to start thinking about it and thinking about what are you going to track? When the time comes, what are going to be your goals? What are going to be your metrics? So that you can at least communicate with the investors and say, look, we're at pilot stages right now. It's a bit too early, but what we are going to track and what our goals are these things, because then at least they can attach to that narrative and go, okay, I get it, but at least we're going to start tracking that in the future, and we'll have a good idea of what that looks like. And if you're not doing it now and you're at later stages, definitely start doing it and make sure that you're including that as part of your presentation and pitch. So you might be saying, okay, well, cool story, Paul. So how do we then build the pitch and presentation? And the methodology that I've learned over the years and created over the years and teach to others is the idea of moving away from a scripted, sometimes almost robotic sounding pitch and presentation. The reality is of what I've learned over the years is that the stickiest and most memorable pitches in any scenario, pitch competitions, pitch forums, wherever you're pitching, the stickiest and most memorable ones are the ones that have a narrative, a story to them, some sort of narrative that people can attach to. Again, one of the challenges that I have found over the years with clean tech, health tech, more deeper tech along those lines is the entrepreneurs have a tendency to have the challenge of knowing too much. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't know things. You definitely should know what you're talking about. But the challenge ends up being is that because you know so much about the thing you're doing, everything seems important. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times the pitch and presentation gets really overcomplicated with a lot of statistics and a lot of data and a lot of points that the audience, in some cases, they might not know what you're talking about. They might not get it. And having all of those things doesn't necessarily impress them, because what ends up happening is they get distracted because they go, well, I don't know what that is. Should I know what that is? I feel kind of dumb because I don't know what that is. And meanwhile, they're thinking something else and you're still pitching and presenting. And the challenge is, if they're not listening to you, they're missing the mark, right? If they're, the whole point is they should be listening to you. You are the star of the show when you're pitching and presenting. So they really should be listening to what you're saying. So what I would encourage you all to do is to try to keep it as simple as possible. I see your picture, your message, Kata. Yes, maybe I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and I know I should have looked it up before the presentation today because I was going to bring it up as an example, and I have to look back in my records and go and find it. So I will copy down your email right now, and I will shoot you an email as soon as I pull it up. So ultimately, my point is to keep it as simple as possible and try to do that around a story. I'll give you some examples in a moment. So what I suggest and what I've learned over the years and what I've utilized and taught many other entrepreneurs who have gone on to raise a lot of money, win competitions, or anything along those lines, what I teach is a combination between story and structure. So having the story to tell and then structuring it in a way that makes sense to the audience. And so this is the pitch methodology. It is called PSOIAS. And PSOIAS, it stands for problem, solution, opportunity, which includes you and the team if there is one, and then your ask, and it's all connected together through story. So it's called PSOIAS. We'll just chat PSOIAS like that. So ultimately, the idea is that you're telling a story in a structured way that's easy for the audience to understand and digest, so that just like reading a good book or watching a movie or a TV show that has a very clear story and almost like build up of the story to the climax and then the falling action. Once you're able to follow that, that's an easy story to understand, right? Whereas as opposed to my wife and I have been watching a show recently on Apple TV called Constellation. It's an interesting show, but it is super hard to follow because it's jumping all over the place. And a couple times we almost said, do we want to keep watching it? Because it's just really, really hard to follow because they're jumping between different quantum realities and past and present and future and all over the place. It's a bit hard to follow. Well, we don't want our pitch to be like that, right? We want our pitch to be simple to start, simply build up that story, get to the climax, which is really how this is a business, how is it sustainable, how are you going to keep growing, how do you make money, hopefully eventually, and or sell the technology, and then what comes out of that, and how do you make it all happen? So let me give you some examples. Now, I was going to use a Cleantech example, but I decided not to, because I wanted to use, again, when I was thinking about it, I kept going, well, I want to teach them to keep it simple and have simple examples. And so then I said, okay, well, then I should use a simple example. So a simple example is the one I've got on the screen here, and it's completely fake. Don't take this as real statistics or anything like that. But basically, it's a simulated business around something called a smart mug. It was an idea I had several years ago, and I never pursued it. But basically, the idea is that we all have burned our mouths probably at some point, eating hot food or drinking a hot beverage. And so the idea is this is the problem, right? The problem is this. But actually, what I would describe if I was pitching it is the problem is not just burning your mouth, it's also the potential for wasting time, wasting money, because while you wait for it to cool down, maybe it gets too cold, you don't want to reheat it. So understanding the problem in a simple way and describing the problem in a simple way. This can be challenging, as I was mentioning, this sometimes I find can be challenging for clean tech, health tech, impact tech entrepreneurs, because again, some tend to kind of get really deep into the science almost right away. But the challenge is that maybe I don't understand the science. I'm an impact investor. I want to get involved in clean tech, but I don't really understand that particular science. And now you're possibly losing me. But if you explain to me very simply, like using the example before, what I loved about, I want to say his name was Kevin, well, the one that was capturing phosphor and then using the pellets to clean the lakes. The thing I loved, his opening was as simple as, did you know that over 60% of Canada's freshwater lakes are over polluted and fish are dying at a extreme rate? Dramatic pause, right? This is something that almost everybody can attach to, and probably is a little bit of like a fish slapping you in the face, because this is a statistic. I mean, I had no idea. To me, I'm Canadian. I think to myself, oh, no, in Canada, we've got lots of clean water and things are okay here. And, we're doing better than most other places. But in fact, actually, it's not great out there, and we need to do something about it. And what I loved was that he was able to find a way of simply stating the problem without necessarily getting into the science. So it's like, okay, here's a big problem. Oh, it hurts. It's terrible. But then he turns around and goes, but my company can make it better. And here's how we do it. There's already a whole bunch of excess phosphor that comes off of farms because of fertilization. We have found a way to capture that out of the runoff from those farms. Here's how we do it. Here's what we're doing. And then what we do is we sell the byproduct or this product to municipalities and government, and then they use it to clean the lakes. Very simple, doesn't get it deeply into the science. And the other benefit of not getting deep into the science is you don't have to worry about giving away your trade secrets, giving away your intellectual property, because of course, that's always a question. I get that question all the time. Well, Paul, I want to pitch, but, I don't want to give away my secrets and IP of my company. Well, you don't have to. You can just tell me what it does in a general sense, but not like the patentable background of it. So then what you want to do is you want to make sure that talking about the solution actually meets the problem, meets the problem itself. So do you have a clear value proposition? If you can, show me, don't just tell me. And how do you do that? Well, if you've got a physical product and even if you're on screen, show me the physical product. Something about tangibility gives a huge sense to the investor. Okay, this is real. It's not just some rainbows and butterflies and fluffy clouds. There's actually something to this. Or if your Cleantech solution or whatever your solution is happens to be software based, one of the best things I've seen over the years, tell me a customer story. So if you have a pilot, if you have a customer, show me the story of that customer. How do they use it? What does it look like in their hands? Now, some of you I know are possibly at pilot stages or pre-pilot, and you might be saying, well, but Paul, but what if we don't have a customer yet? Well, what would be an ideal customer? What would that situation look like? What would it look like in their hands when you get that perfect customer scenario? And how would they get value from it? What would be maybe some of the things they would say after they start getting that value from it? And again, that customer could be provincial governments, could be anybody, right? So what does it look like in their hands and how do they get value? Then, of course, you want to approach the numbers. Now, this slide is particularly talking about some of the important numbers in your business, things like how do you produce revenue? How are you sustainable as a business? Do you have any proven traction? So this might be like pilots in your pipeline, pilots that you've enacted, customers that are actually paying for your product. Please, please, please make sure that you're talking about that when somebody has paid you, even if it's pilots. Please talk about that. It's very important. And I know that you guys might be saying, well, but Paul, obviously, but you'd be amazed how many pitches I've seen over the years where people actually forget to talk about their customers and their revenue. And a good example of this is a few years ago, had a pitch event that I was at, and the company came in and they say, oh, we built this software that helps companies manage their HR and do more inclusive and diverse hiring practices. Cool. Okay, so they talk about the whole thing. They go through their team. They talk about it all. And at the end, of course, the panel's like, well, how do you know that your product is working? And how do you have any impact measurements? Because you say you're doing this. And then the entrepreneur goes, oh, well, of course we do. We have LG and Microsoft as customers. And everybody in the audience went, oh, what? Why didn't you say that? And, oh, they're paying you. Why didn't you say that, right? So you'd be amazed how many times that probably is missed. For whatever reason, some people shy away from talking about revenue and customers. And sometimes I find that people get too deep into the tech and the science of it and all of that, and they forget about, for the investor or the funder, the grant provider, they're really looking for that traction, that movement. You have people that are willing to use this, because if we're going to invest, We want to know that you can get more customers and learn more over time. So I've got a slide in here that sort of talks about understanding your financials. I'm not going to go over this. It's just here to kind of help. I will provide these slides, or I've provided these slides to Tamara, and she can share them if she likes afterwards for the audience. But these are just some considerations that you can have as part of your presentation. So a lot of people have a competition slide, and I'm definitely not saying that you shouldn't. But one of the common things I hear is, you know, the quadrant competition slide is like, oh, we have competition. And of course, we're at the top right of the quadrant and we're better, faster than everybody else. And we do things better, differently. So what I want to say to you is you can have and should have things about competition and remembering that there's always going to be competition, whether direct or indirect. So don't be afraid to talk about your competition. But what I would really want to stress to you is it's one thing to have a slide about it, but what you say doesn't have to be literally what's on the slide. So I'm a big fan of, you know, yeah, we have competition, but what I want to hear as an investor or funder is I want to hear what makes you better, different, or unique. What's your unique differentiator? How are you going to win? Really, what sets you apart from everybody else? Specifically, if you can be as specific as possible, again, the more I can attach to that narrative and really see, okay, I see how they're different, and that's why they're going to win. The other one that I see a lot, and I'm sure Nina and Tamara have seen this a lot as well, is the market size slide. Oh, the market is so huge, you know, it's got $50 billion of this and 300 million of this and blah, blah, blah. So what I see a lot is a lot of people get to the market size slide and they just start rambling off the market sizes and the numbers, and they try to impress people with these big, huge numbers. But here's what I'm going to say to you guys. An investor of mine from years ago said it really well. They said, well, but Paul, everybody's market size is huge. If they're pitching, their market size is huge. People don't pitch if they don't even have a huge market size, right? Because then it's just a hobby business or a small local cafe or something like that. They're not going to be pitching and they're not going to be talking about market size. They're going to talk about market opportunity, maybe in their given area. So what I would say to all of you is, I bet you every one of you's market size is huge. What I want to really know as an investor, you don't have to tell me the numbers. I can see the numbers on the slide. What I really want you to tell me is how you're going to get that market. What's your plan? What's your strategy? An old investor of mine once said it really well, which I really appreciated, which was, what is your plan to execute and how do you execute the plan? So again, how are you going to get that market? So it's not about the market size. It's about how you get the market. What's your plan to execute? How do you execute the plan? Or some of us call it beachhead strategy. So where do you start? What's your starting point? What's your entry point? And then how do you expand and get more market from there? Oh, do I have that twice? Oh, my apologies. I have the slide twice by accident. My apologies. Then the other one that I really, really want to focus on, and again, I know it seems obvious, but you'd be amazed how many pitches I've seen over the years where people forget to talk about themselves and their team. It's usually one of two things, is either they forget to talk about themselves and their team, and the things that make them the key people to help win this race, or they make this slide so in depth that it's basically like a biography of all their team members. Look, we don't need the biography. We don't need a book on everybody on the team. What I would really encourage you to think about here is, why are you the key people to make this happen? What really makes you an amazing team? You know, what I've seen over the years, and this is something that investors are really looking for. Some of them will call it pedigree. Some of them will call it just that team connection, team chemistry, if you will. when you have the right team, and I bet you as I'm saying some of this, it looks to me like William and Ruslan might be on the same team. I would love to know, they don't have to say it right now. Maybe they want to put it in the chat. But um, maybe there's something they can say that is what makes them such an amazing team, right? Maybe it's the way they communicate. Maybe it's the way that they're able to solve problems. Maybe it's the way that they're able to overcome challenges, right? I don't know, but great teams have a great chemistry. And I'm trying to avoid using a hockey analogy right now just because I'm in Canada. But there is something to be said about that team chemistry. And so if you can kind of lock into what that is and talk about what makes you a great team, I'd love to hear that, because your basic bios are going to be right on the screen. I can see 20 years of business experience, worked with so and so and so and so, right? I can see that. But again, remember, what you say verbally doesn't have to match what's on the screen. Again, you're the star of the show. And I love seeing things like timelines. When did you start this venture? What were some of the key milestones that you and your team have achieved along the way? And then last but not least is your ask, right? So what do you need in order to achieve the results you're looking to achieve? So you build up this story, and it is exactly that. It's like you're building up this big story, and then you go, and here's what we need to make it happen. And that doesn't have to be money. I get it's not always going to be about raising money or getting funding. Sometimes we're not fundraising. But maybe it's other things like having key connections to partners, potential customers, opening doors that you might not be able to open on your own. One of the key things that I always try to remember is you never know who knows who, and you don't know if you don't ask, right? The worst that can happen is they say no. And that's okay. At least now you know. So ultimately, don't be afraid to ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get. But whatever your ask is, be as specific as possible. We're raising X to achieve Y. And, the simple answer that I hear a lot of people make is, we're raising, I'll just use an example. We're raising $500,000 for sales, marketing, and R&D. I hear that a lot. That's fine, but it doesn't really tell me what you're going to achieve with that money. An investor I had once, an investor friend I had, he put it a really cool way, which was, if you imagine the money is hiring employees, what are those employees going to achieve? What are you getting them to do, right? Yeah, sales, marketing, and R&D, but maybe it's things like, we're raising $500,000 which will help us to triple our sales within the next year, and to expand to 2 new markets, which will double our revenue by 2026. Wow, okay, now you're really giving me something to chew on, and I have an understanding of what my money is going to go towards. Because also bearing in mind that you're almost never going to get one check, right? If you're raising $500,000 or $1 million, that's going to be probably 5 to 10 checks. So each of those investors needs to understand, what is their portion of that money going to help to achieve help you to achieve. And so with that said, I meant to actually put my LinkedIn onto this this slide here, but you have my name. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Sorry.
Yes, Ruslan, go ahead.
I have a short question. So everything you showed is very helpful, and but I would like you to ask if you can really stress the Canadian specifics, or maybe repeat them if I missed those points. Like, what exactly is specific to Canada?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily specific to Canada per se. What I do know is, from my experience in Canada, they are going to be definitely looking for, like I said, the IP parts. That's going to come up a lot. Relationships is a really big key here. So investors don't usually invest if they don't trust you and they don't have the relationship building beforehand. And definitely those impact metrics. Like I said, the Cleantech impact investors in Canada are really looking at how do you measure impact, what are the metrics to success, and what is the plan to execute. Again, I don't know if those are specifically Canadian things. I can just tell you that from my experience in Canada, those are definitely things that are going to come up. I wouldn't be surprised if they're common in most other countries as well, including Switzerland, including most parts of Europe, and other countries. I just can say for sure that absolutely, without a doubt, these are things that are Canadian impact investors and Cleantech investors are going to bring up or look for, is the relationship building and the connection building.
And are they looking for the impact worldwide? Like, are they more, let's say, yeah, worldwide?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily,
or-
because it depends, right? Like it depends. I can't say, everybody's different. Every business is different, right? And at the beginning, the reality is that you might have an entry market. I talked about the one that's cleaning the lakes. For him, he's starting with Canada. That's his entry to market. Does he dream to eventually be able to clean lakes around the world? Absolutely, for sure. Is he going to be able to do it? I don't know. But for now, his focus is on Canada and then the hope to be able to expand to other places in the future, right? So your impact is whatever your impact is. I think what I would rather hear is what are your impact goals and how are you measuring that how are you measuring that impact?
Well, I have a burning question on behalf of everyone here for Paul. Given the time constraint, 4 minutes, maybe a little bit of buffer, how can they deal with the time and choosing wisely what they put on those slides, and maybe something other than, oh, let me set a timer for 4 minutes and see if I can talk as fast as I can before the 4-minute mark, and if I can't, maybe see what I can cut out. Maybe there's a different approach, tried and true, that you could suggest.
Honestly, what I would go back to is, again, just keep it simple. Again, remembering you don't have to have every detail in there. The whole point of this is to whet the appetite for further conversation, to give them enough information to know that this is a good opportunity, that there's definitely something to this. The biggest key points are the ones exactly that I pointed out. One of the ones that I will definitely say is what I've seen over the years is a lot of people tend to concentrate a lot on the problem, but it's not necessarily the problem that I need to know about. It's the solution you're creating for that problem, because there's a lot of problems in the world and there's a lot of different ways. If anybody here knows how to code, for example, right? Like if I go to a developer and I say, I need to solve this problem, there's a lot of different ways to code to solve the problem, right? So what I really want to know is about the solution, ultimately. I want to know about the solution. I really want to know about the team. I want to know about the business model and how do you propose to make money. And I want to know how you're going to get there. Again, that plan to execute and how you're going to execute the plan. If you've got those 4 key things, you are very much ahead of the game. And that's the really basic key things that I need to know. And yeah, like I said, just keep it simple at the end of the day.
Hi, Paul. This is Pascal from Clumsy Recycling. So what would be according to you, the best strategy to expand to Canada as a Swiss startup? As in, would it be finding a potential associate there, or considering moving to Canada? How frequently we should visit? Before having the critical network and make the move, right? So.
I think there's multiple answers to that question, actually. So I think it depending on the scenario, right? So like, I know that some entry points is, for example, finding a customer, right? Okay. That can, or for lack of a better term, a customer, or like a, you know, in your case, a composite recycling. This might have to do with like a government type customer, a municipal customer, or something like that. So one entry point might be, oh, finding that right customer, and that's your entry point in. As Nina was talking about, I don't know if you were in Nina's session this morning, but you know, she talked about the different hubs across Canada. So I've also seen some people just come in and they kind of regularly visit the hubs and build connections and things like that. And then maybe find a team member or a representative to be the boots on the ground, so to speak, and have sort of a land and expand strategy in that sense. I can't speak to your personal situation, but you might be like, hey, you know what? I want to move to Canada. So that's another potential route. And I know that we have the startup visa program, albeit I think somewhat maybe expensive, but it does, and it's, I've heard varying timelines on it, but I think it does work. And I've seen a lot of companies come into Canada. I think the more legitimate you are and the more that you've got something to bring to the economy and benefit, probably that very much helps the process. Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on the scenario and what works best for you. Or you know, partnerships, right? Another strong one is definitely partnerships, right? Finding the right partner that maybe has inroads to bring your solution to life in Canada, for example. And there's a lot of government organizations that you can look at, like EDC, for example, has a lot of trade programs. Foresight, I mean, I don't know why I didn't say that sooner. I mean, talk to Nina and the folks at Foresight for sure, because they've got inroads in almost every corner of the country. So when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Thanks.
And maybe to add one thing, and that goes with what you said, Paul, the trade commissioners from the Canadian government. There is a trade commissioner at the Canadian Embassy in Bern, and they usually have, and it's part of their service to talk to entrepreneurs, so they might be able to give you some resources as well.
One last question, a really quick one. So in the structure you presented to us, Paul, you know, like the problem solver, opportunity and ask. And in 4 minutes, how much would you spend on each section? You say a lot of people spend too much on the problem, so you should do like 20 seconds on the problem.
Yeah, like I usually recommend in let's say it's a 5-minute pitch. I probably wouldn't spend more than 30 seconds on the problem. Like pretty straightforward. I like the example I gave of I think his name is Kevin. You know, did you know that 60% of Canada's lakes are overpolluted? Done. That's it. That's finished. I don't need to, you know, the other example I gave of the HR management software, the one when I worked with them, the one we ended up switching it to was because they had started out when in their original pitch, they spent like 2 minutes talking about diversity and inclusivity, hiring, and blah blah blah, and they had like newspaper articles and all sorts. They spent so long on it that they didn't have time for the rest of the content. So then when I worked with them, we switched it around and changed it to hiring, inclusive hiring and diversity. No, sorry, diversity and inclusiveness is a major problem in the North American enterprise workplace.
That's it. Yeah.
Done. And then they said, yeah, but don't we need to provide like statistics? And I said, the reality is if people don't know that at this point, they're probably living under a rock or they're Donald Trump. And if that's the case, if they don't recognize that that's a problem, the reality is they're not your customer and they're definitely not your investor, right? So I said, so you've talked about the problem, but that's fine. I really want to hear about the solution that you're providing to that though, right? Oh, well, okay. Well, we've built this HR management software that LG and Microsoft uses. They pay us X amount per year. Here's been the results. Here's why they love it. And they're just 2 of 12 customers and growing. Here's the incredible team that's made this happen. here's what the future looks like. Here's our pipeline. We need $1.2 million to expand, blah, 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 right? As you can see there, I just did like a 45-second pitch for them. I spent very little time on the problem. What I really care about, especially when it comes to clean tech and this type of technologies, I really need to hear a lot about the solution, right? And then really the team that's building it, right? I want to know who you are. What are you doing? Why do you care? Who are you? Why should I care about what you're doing, right? That's the human connection part of it, right? And then I really want to know about the plan, right? What is your plan? That's another big key to it. Because the plan, talking about the plan is a big difference between, is this rainbows and butterflies, or is there actually something behind this that, and I get as an investor, I get that not everything goes according to plan. It almost never does. But I'd rather hear that you have a plan in the first place than hearing a lot of startup pitches that don't have a plan at all, because that's very risky.
Yeah. And the last part, which is ask, do you mean like talk about the fundraising, or like ask, and that's 15 seconds or?
Yeah, it shouldn't take long. I mean, really, again, as long as you're as specific as possible, right? And I also would encourage you not to ask for a whole bunch of things. Like, what's the most important thing for your business at this time? And as I said, it may not be money. I get that, right? You might have already done your fundraising, or you're not fundraising yet. So what's the most important thing for your business? Is it introductions to customers? Is it potential partners? Is it advisors of some sort? Whatever that thing is going to be that is going to help you in your business at this time. Like, there's a story from several years ago of an entrepreneur. I saw them pitch, and they didn't have an ask at all at the end of their pitch. And I happened to go for lunch with them with another friend a couple of days later, and just said, "Hey, I'm surprised and curious. How come you didn't have an ask?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I'm not fundraising right now, so I don't really have an ask." And I said, "Well, you must need something for your business. Every entrepreneur needs help with something, right?" And if you say you don't, then that actually would make me a bit worried, to be honest. And he said, "Oh, well, we would love a connection to Apple because our solution helps people deploy apps faster, easier, better. But we're only on a kind of like an affiliate program. I'd love to be a partner with them." I said, "Well, why didn't you ask for that?" And he goes, "Well, we're just a Vancouver company. Nobody cares about us. Apple's not going to care." I said, "You never know unless you ask." But a month later, he went to an event in Seattle, asked, and it turned out that somebody in the audience was next door neighbors with an executive at Apple. Long story short, they exited to Apple about 18 months later for $45 million.
Thank you so much for finding time to be here today, for your time, and then I'll see you on Thursday.